I have a couple things to say. So I've only been a buyer. I haven't sold a single Solana token. And so we are, net buyers, and we're buying a bunch of stuff. But I hate acknowledging that, and this is why, my tone was more non-committal when we did the pod, is that I really don't like this culture that's emerged via Twitter mostly, where you all of a sudden have to be this maximalist that basically falls on their sword and never sells in order to be legitimate. And I think that that's a really dangerous place to be. So, look, if I take a...
Why is that dangerous?
Yeah. Well, if I take a much, much bigger step back, let me put Solana in the context of crypto, and let me put crypto in the context of the markets, and where we are today at the end of the week after, Q3 earnings in November of 2021. We have the stock market at absolute all-time highs.
Ripping.
We have crypto at absolute all-time highs.
Ripping.
We have the art markets. I don't know if you guys saw Phillips and Christie's and Sotheby's this past week at absolute all-time highs. Sold another vehicle for $25 million. We have inflation at a 30-year high. We have 10-year break-evens at a 25-year high. We have, 1 point some odd trillion dollars that we just approved last week, and we're still horse trading on another $1.8 trillion of stimulus that we're going to put in. And so then you have, I think the most important thing, which is the two most important founders of our generation, the two smartest people who have really consistently won, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, have collectively sold more than $11 billion of their holdings this year alone. And if you can't take all of that and decide for yourself what's right for you and your family, you're doing yourself a disservice. I think it's important for me to never sort of be forced to tell folks whether I'm buying or selling, although I'm willing to do it in moments where I think it's important. But I think it's really important to understand the context. And so I think these folks that think derisively about individuals who are managing risk, I think it's really naive, and I think it creates a lot of missed opportunity for them as well. If the smartest people in the world are now selling their core holdings that they told you they would never sell, and you are not reconsidering your position on things, you're either much smarter than them, or you're being really, really reckless.
All right, there you have it. Yeah, and just so people also know inside baseball, we have a docket of stories that we talk about on our group chat that make up the docket for the show, but I'll bring stuff up, and I didn't bring that up in some way to cause trouble or anything. I thought you guys would want to clear the air about it, and I understand Chamath's position of, hey, you don't want to give these things oxygen or whatever, but I think
I didn't even know that we needed to clear the air until, I went to the conference and enough people mentioned it. So.
Well, but what's so funny is half the people on Twitter spend all their time in crypto land saying things like, never going to make it, have fun staying poor. They're extremely, Jason, as you said, tribal. I'm not sure that they're doing first principles analysis of these things. They've gotten exceptionally lucky.
Yeah.
Some of them are exceptionally good, but many people, broadly speaking, have gotten exceptionally lucky. And I think a little bit of it is getting to their head where they become, very virulent against people that they think, whose perspectives may actually be negatively affecting their position without actually understanding what David said, which is these are incredibly deep liquid markets, and one person's opinion can't do much of anything.
Right. That's a really good point. I'd like to give my opinion on Solana, but the thing, or just crypto in general, the thing that's hard about it is that it's hard to talk about the benefits of, say, the Solana blockchain without being seen as a pumper of Sol or a dumper of ETH or whatever, because all these things are so intrinsically connected. I learned a lot of really bullish things about Solana, at this conference. The biggest thing is, there's basically a battle for the hearts and minds of developers going on right now between Solana and Ethereum. That's why Solana has raced up to, over 200. I don't know what, 7,000% increase or something incredible like that. The reason is because Solana as a blockchain gives confirmations back in something like 400 milliseconds, whereas Ethereum takes, minutes. And, a transaction that might cost tens of dollars, $10, $20, $30, $50 of gas on Ethereum costs pennies on Solana. And so
it's
that's
disruptive.
Yeah, exactly. It's also, a lot of developers feel like the developer tools that they've created are easier than building on Solidity. The thing that Solana gives up, the trade-off that it makes, is decentralization. There's basically that transactions are processed by 20 validators, and they're a top 20 based on holdings of souls, just kind of like this proof of stake model. So anyway, there's some trade-offs there. I can tell you that, it's the view of, our friends at Multicoin. And, I heard a lot of this view at the conference, although obviously you have to take it with a grain of salt because these are the biggest believers. But their view is that Solana over the next year will flip Ethereum based on developer activity, that there's real companies being created.
We spend a lot of time actually before we do anything, that's the only thing we've been looking at, and Syndica, Fractal, a lot of the stuff that we've done, DeSo, is purely driven by developer interest. When we see developers in the open source ecosystem building things on top of the stuff, making stuff that's composable and usable by other people and building infrastructure, we don't really second guess that because they are spending the most important currency, which is not monetary capital, but human capital.
Yeah, their time, their skill.
Their time and their skill and
their reputation. Apply to another project. Yeah.
And so when enough developers, so I've always thought you just follow the developers, and as more and more projects get started, you just have to unemotionally support that. I think the writing is on the wall, which is Bitcoin is gold, Ethereum looks like it's trending to be silver, and Solana could be the first, but there will be others that come after it, of real developer ecosystems that can be built on top of it. The other thing that I would offer up to people for them to think about is, before you blindly go and rush into crypto, one way in which I try to think about these things is in the following way. You see these projects get started all the time, and I would view each of these projects as a mini economy and really try to think, what is the economic value of what's happening under the hood? So simple example, Helium is an interesting project that's trying to build a completely decentralized, 5G infrastructure, right? Render is a really interesting project that's trying to build a completely decentralized, graphical processing infrastructure, right? GPUs essentially. In both of those things, you can quantifiably, economically measure what the value is that people get, right? In the case of Render, you're basically displacing an AWS instance. And so, that has a price and a value. And so, for Render to be valuable, there's an economic value that it replaces. If you're joining a hotspot, that has an economic value where you hadn't necessarily have to pay, to get internet connectivity. If you all of a sudden are on the Helium network, that displaces a measurable economic quantum. Understanding that is probably, and taking the absolute value of that, is the best way of really understanding which projects have potential. So if you take those two ideas and marry them together, where is their developer interest and where is their measurable economic activity? At the intersection of those, I think, are the really compelling projects that can win.
Well, the thing that complicates all of this is that the developers are not just picking based on which language or technology or stack they think has the most potential. They also have acquired economic stakes in it. So a developer who might be objective and say, hey, this new platform is better than Ethereum, might be sitting on millions of dollars in Ethereum, and they're like, I want to keep my bet going here, and I'm going to keep talking my book.
Possibly, but I do think that developers in general will choose the platform that's easiest and cheapest and fastest for them to develop on.
Which would mean the list on CoinMarketCap of market cap ones that has been static for a decade of crypto almost, largely the top 10 doesn't change that much. It's XRP, it's Stellar, Ethereum, Bitcoin, Tether. That could be up for grabs. That whole thing could change now that people are actually building projects and the projects are getting competitive with each other. And that's that flippening we're talking about. Correct, Sachs?
Yeah, I think that what's tricky here, again, is I never want to give anyone investment advice. I mean, That's just not my job. And if there's anyone out there listening to the show because they're trying to get tips or tricks or whatever for investment, I'm not really comfortable telling people what to do. So, everyone just has to understand that. I do feel like what I saw at this conference over the past week in terms of developer enthusiasm and activity was very bullish. Actually, it was a lot like I went to the Ethereum conference, I think it was back in 2017, several years ago, and it felt a little bit like that, although I would say that this time it felt less academic. Like several years ago, it felt more like white papers. Now it actually feels like real projects and businesses that people are trying to create.
Still infrastructure and less applications, or more applications and infrastructure?
Chamath mentioned a couple of them. So there's Helium, which is creating a decentralized network for Wi-Fi. There's Render, which is creating a decentralized network for GPU. There's one called Hive Mapper, where I met the founder. It's a decentralized network for people to map the world. You can think of, the concept of a miner that Bitcoin invented. Think of them more as like a resource provider to a network. So with Bitcoin, we call them miners, but they're the validators of transactions, and we're trying to incentivize them through block rewards, basically through small bits of Bitcoin that get released to provide these valuable computing resources to the network. And so people are figuring out now how to create massively decentralized networks where you have thousands or millions of resource providers provide a little bit of something to the network for everyone's benefit, and in exchange they get some coin. That's like a really interesting model that couldn't exist before crypto. And so, I think it's very interesting. But, in order for that to work, you have to have you need fast, efficient, scalable blockchains. And the feeling I'll give credit here to Tushar, who's one of the GPs at Multicoin. His view is that this was the iPhone moment for blockchain, that what Solana has built, because it's massively scalable and also very cheap. Again, you can run a lot of transactions for pennies. Now, all of that is obviously very bullish for Solana. The thing I wrestle with is, and Chamath kind of alluded to this, is I think everything's kind of in a bubble right now because of monetary and fiscal policy. And so, I guess you could say that I'm long Solana versus ETH, but I do kind of worry that the whole world right now is very bubbly. And so as a GP, what do you do about that? I can tell you right now, this second, we are sitting on Solana that we have not sold. So, I am long in that sense. However, sometime over the next whatever number of years, we will distribute out our position of Solana to LPs.
And then the LPs will make their decisions.
And then they'll make their decision.